Hi everyone, welcome to the part 2 session. We're going to begin with the time and billing section of the software today, and then we're going to look at appointments and projects. So if there's any questions as we're going through things, best thing to do is just to type them in the program that's connecting us. You'll receive an answer as quickly as possible, but if you don't get one today, then we'll be replying to you later on through email to answer your questions for anything that we didn't necessarily get to today. So let's start right away with the time billing section here, which is what we're seeing right now. Now, before we get into really doing a whole lot with the time billing, there's a few things that we can choose to certainly set up if we want to. So in order to set some things up, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the left-hand side of the program here. We're going to look at the setup options. So it's in the blue area on the left. It looks like a stopwatch with a few stacks of coins and a pencil. And this is going to bring up this window here for you. And we're just going to sort of start at the top and then work our way down through everything within here. So the very first thing we'll talk about is billing rates. Now, one of the things that we can point out about the settings in here is that you actually don't have to set these things up. These are very much optional. And the reason why billing rates would also be optional as well is because we do have clients who don't necessarily use billing rates. What they do is they just care about the amount of time they put into the program, so that, let's say, every 6 months they're used to charging their client a flat rate of however much, and they're used to doing a roughly 100 hours of work in that time period for them. So they don't really need billing rates because they've already got an agreed on price, and all they want to make sure is that every 6 months they're still doing the same amount of hours, let's say give or take 5 or 6 hours or so. So that's why you're not forced to putting billing rates. Now, that said, you can put in as many as you want. This drop down here in the top right, this is allowing you to select whether rates are sort of applicable to everybody or if they're just going to be sort of just for that one username here. Now, really the way that the program is more meant to work is that for each name, you're just going to give each person one default rate for that person. Everything else can be set up by doing other settings in the program. So we'll get to that in a few minutes, but let's just start by explaining how they're entered. With the all employees, this is rates that are basically just accessible for the program that you can use to set up for pretty much any type of work that's going on in the office. So when you click on add a new rate, it's going to give you a new rate down here. And then what you're going to do is you're going to go to the right-hand side and change the name of it, and then you're going to give it a charge. Now, every rate that you add to the system has to have a different name. It can't have the same name twice, but you can put the same charge rate as many times as you want, even though that may be redundant. But the reason why you have to have different names is so they are distinguished from each other. And you'll also notice that this one here is showing that it's locked, and that's because this has been added to time entries that are now used in the system. And so we can't let the program let you just delete a billing rate, because that would then affect the history of all the entries in which that billing rate is tied to. So in order for you to delete a rate in future, you would have to delete all of those time entries, which would basically be something that you wouldn't want to do, because if you ever get audited in future or have to look at that trail of items and see what was used, you want to make sure that that information is maintained. Now for the drop down here, with all the other new usernames you've added to the system, like I said, you just basically want to add one rate to the user here. And when you do, this tells the program that this is this person's default rate. So until the program has been told otherwise, whenever this person enters time on something, this will be the rate that's automatically chosen. However, there are settings that you can choose that will override this, and we're about to look at that in the next couple seconds here, actually. So speaking of other settings then that we can use, let's take a look at, on the left here, tasks billing setup. Now this is a list of all of the different task types that are available in the program, including any customizable ones that may have been created by your office. And what we've got here is global settings that apply to all clients when we're working on this kind of task. And then we can say on the right here, okay, now when we're entering time, which is either a setting that applies to everybody in the program or specific users, what's going to be charged and what's going to be set. So if we stick with all employees, it means that any user who's adding time to this kind of task for any client in the system, this is the name that's going to be given to the task item. Then this is the checkbox here where it says default billing information. This checkbox will make it say that it's billable. If you remove that checkbox, it'll be unbillable by default. And then of the billing rate that you chose, this will be the billing rate that's chosen by default. So you can choose from the ones you've added into your system. Or you can override that and choose a flat rate. So instead of it charging hourly, it will just charge the flat rate. So this will be the default setting that will apply to anybody who adds time to this type of task, regardless of which client they're putting time in for. Also, in the Other Settings tab, you can say that when the time is initially added to the system, that it's going to show as WIP status of one of these three ones. But you could also just say that when the task is closed, that it changes to another status. So it could show as ready for invoice once the actual task has been shown as closed. And then you have some descriptions down here, which are put in by default. So you've got the internal one and then the one that appears on the invoice. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's what has to appear in the invoice. That's just what will appear by default if you don't edit anything. Now, you can do this, like I said, as something that applies to everybody, or you can go in and do it as a per user thing. So you could say that when Adam enters time on quarterly HST for any client he's working on, it'll use this rate and these descriptions and so on. But then when Ann puts work or time in on the same type of task, it's going to use different rates and different descriptions and different settings. So you can get really specific if you want to, and these settings will override the user's default billing rate. Now, one thing that can override these is just above it here on the left, called work codes. Now, by default, you don't have to set up any billing rates or settings at all for work codes. You can just simply give a work code to the system and then give it a description. Now, the general purpose of this is that, let's say I'm adding time on a client, and I've done it over the past couple of days, but it's the same work that I keep adding time to. So every time I put in the system, I've got more of the same thing, basically, just in separate entries. So if I go to create the invoice and I say, okay, apply all that time and show the client the original details, I'm going to have 5 lines of the same information showing the same kind of details and descriptions with maybe just a different amount of time allotted to them because I've worked on them on different periods of time in the days. So effectively showing the client 5 lines of pretty much the same description would be sort of redundant. So what we could do is we could apply the time to a work code, and that work code has a description which encompasses the work I do in general. So then what I can do is when I'm on the invoice, I can say to group by that work code. And then instead of showing 5 lines of the same thing, I can just show the work code description and summarize it that way instead. And that is one way in which you can modify what is originally being shown on an invoice versus what you actually want the client to see. There is still one more modification that we'll look at once we get to the invoicing area. Now, further to this sort of basic function of it, you can also go to the next tab here, and you can say, okay, now when this billing or this work code is being selected, that it's going to override any other settings that have already been chosen and go with these settings instead. Now, this is not usually relevant to be utilized unless you're going to be using a time entry method called the horizontal quick entry method. So it's a quick way of putting in a lot of time entries, but the program has to be told in advance that you're going to be using work codes and also what charges are going to be used when those work codes are selected. Because when you're putting in time using the horizontal form, there's only very specific things you can select on there. So we'll show you the 2 different types of quick entry forms in a few minutes. We're not that far away from it. But basically, this is the same as what we saw in the task billing setup just a few minutes ago, except it applies specifically to this work code. And then again, you can get specific and say that any user who uses this work code, these are the settings. Or that when Adam uses this work code, these are the settings. But when Tim does it, these are the different settings instead. So you don't have to get that specific if you don't want to. And again, work codes are very much optional in the program. You don't have to use them. Now, there is no limit to the amount of work codes you can put into the system, but you may want to try to keep them as, to the point as possible. Instead of putting hundreds and hundreds of them, you may want to just sort of put one that applies to maybe several different types of things and go with that, just to clean it up in the system. Now, next up below, we have interruption reasons. So you can add a new interrupt, you can give it a name, and then just a sort of quick description. What this applies to is if you're using a live timer in the program, under the clock tools in the very lower left-hand corner here, you'll see there's 4 icons. The icon on the right, which looks like a stopwatch with a phone on it, that's called the interruption timer. So when you're already working on a timer and you get interrupted by something, you can click that. That'll pause the first timer you're working on and call up another one in the middle of your screen. You can only do up to one interruption at a time, just so you know. And then you'll have a list here from these drop-downs as to why you're getting interrupted, so quick interruption reasons. and then you can choose from that list so that it automatically fills out, your sort of quick description if you want to do that. And then once you're done with your interruption and you go to save it, it'll come up with the full details of it, so you can fill out the rest of your information, like what you're charging and so on. And then once you save your interruption, it goes back to the original timer you're working on, so you can just pick up from where you left off at that point. So this is just a drop down of very quick sort of common reasons as to why you're interrupted. But again, you don't have to use these, and if you're not going to be using timers, these would be irrelevant to you. Next up, we look at taxes. There are no taxes in the program by default. They apply strictly to when you're using the invoices. And basically what you're going to do is you're just going to set up what types of taxes are available, so that when you are using your invoices and you go to, say, the tax you want to use, you can choose the correct one. So what you're going to have to do on the left-hand column is click on Add New for each individual name of each tax and its rate. So you can see I've got 3 of them here that I've already added to the program. There is GST and PST for Alberta, and then I've got an HST. Now, to make them usable in the invoice, even if it's just one tax rate by itself, you have to add a group on the right here by clicking the Add New on the bottom right hand of the columns. Then you're going to say which rate or rates apply to this, give it a name, and then type in a code. Now, the code can be whatever you want. I just put 1 for the first one, 2 for the second one, 3 for the third one. So it doesn't really matter what you put in for your code there, and then go ahead and save it. So that's going to then create your group, and that's what's going to be choosable from your invoice when you get there. Below that, we have billing categories. A billing category is just simply a way for me to categorize the time entries I've added to the system and give myself an extra reporting ability on the time that's being added to the system. So the example here is I've got a category called bookkeeping. I'm entering time on companies A, B, C, and D. And the work that I'm doing for them is different work, and it's different companies, but in general, the work kind of overall applies to bookkeeping. So I can add all of those entries to the category of bookkeeping, and then later on in my time list, I can go into there and I can say, show me a report of all the time we've added to that kind of category for whatever date range you want to see, and then get a total based on that. So it's another reporting option, and it is an optional thing. You don't have to actually do that. Now, lastly, in general options, we have a couple of different settings that we can choose. Now, the defaults in the program are the horizontal quick entry form type, the advanced calendar form type, and then on the required fields here with these checkboxes, it's basically just nothing selected. So with the required fields, this tells the program that before a user can save a time entry, they are forced to select certain pieces of information, like they have to choose some sort of billing rate or flat rate. They have to choose to say that they're working on a certain kind of task. They have to choose a category. They have to put in descriptions. But you're not required to activate those. The only thing that is required of you to save a time entry to the program is to simply say which client it's for. Now, that said, if you're going to put time into the system that is not for a client, then what you want to do is, let's say it's just for your office, you want to actually create a business client that is your own company, so you can record things that you might just be doing around the office, like cleaning up the kitchen or general filing or whatever it is, so you can keep track of that extra time that you're spending, even though it's not necessarily for a client. On the top right, the time entry locking options. What this does is it tells the program when activated that anytime a time entry has been saved, it's automatically going to be locked. And what that means is nobody can make changes to it except for the administrator. The administrator is the only person who can unlock a locked time entry and then go ahead and make changes. And once it's saved, it automatically gets locked again. Most offices don't really use that. Now, with the form types here, we'll get into these once we start looking at actually adding times to the program. But the most commonly used ones are the advanced time entry form for the calendar and the vertical quick entry form type. So entering time can be done in a few different ways. One way is wherever you find a task or an appointment or a communication entry into the program, you'll notice that somewhere on that item, there's a little green start timer there. So it looks like a stopwatch with a green arrow. And that when it's clicked, because it's already allocated to a client and it knows general information about it, like in this case, a task, it would know what I'm working on. So when I click that, you'll see the bottom of the screen. It actually starts counting, and it knows who I'm working on and what I'm doing. And I can move throughout the program at this point. I don't have to stay here. So I can minimize the software. I can work on whatever it is I need to do. I can go to other programs in my computer. The only thing you want to make sure you don't do is just simply close down client track, because if you do that, you can potentially mess up your time entry there. So I don't have to remember what timer I started if I'm ready to stop that. All I got to do in the bottom left there is go under Clock Tools and click the red icon. You'll also see there's one with blue on it. That just pauses the one you're on, and you can just click the green one to resume. So when we click the red one, it's going to come up with our time entry form so we can verify what it is we're doing here. So it knows in this case that we worked on the sample home builder. It knows that we spent basically just a minute. It'll round up to whatever the closest minute is in this case for the rate I've chosen. You can have rounding up to the nearest 5 minutes or 10 minutes, depending on how you prefer to set up your billing rates. And it knows the description of the time. It knows the task we were working on. I haven't selected any work codes or billing categories in this case, and nothing has been selected automatically because they weren't told to do so. On my billing info tab, this is where I can confirm what I'm charging, whether or not it's billable. This tab is only accessible to those who are given permission to see billing rates in the program. Your admin can choose which users can or cannot see billing rates, and if they can't, it'll just tell them that they can't access this tab. So you can set your WIP status, you can change your billing rate, turn it to a flat rate, you can even override the time. So let's say you did an hour's worth in the office, but then you went to the client's location and worked another hour for the same thing. So you may want to come back in and override the time. On your calendar, it'll still show an hour, but for the actual charging, it'll be charged at 2 hours worth of time. You've got your internal description and then your invoice description. And finally, we can say we did the work in the general tab for the home builder, but in the bill time to tab, let's say I need to actually bill it to a bigger company that owns this. Now, that's not commonly done when it comes to businesses. It's more commonly done when you're doing tax returns, and the company who's gotten you to do most of the rest of their work has also said, could you do the tax returns for my employees, and then just bill it to us. So you would put in the time for, let's say, Bob or Sue or Tom or whoever, but then when you actually go to save the time, you say, okay, bill it to the company they work for. So that's more of a common example, but you can say that the bill goes to whoever. So when the actual time comes to create a invoice for a particular client, the unbilled time will show as unbilled for that client instead. So then you just save your entry and it gets put onto your calendar. Now, because that was just a minute, it just looks like a little sliver there. But of course, as you put more time in, they will be bigger entries. Now, if you're not a fan of a timer, which a lot of people I talk to aren't because they just are not at their desk too often, or they get interrupted too much, or they're on the go a lot, what you can also do is just simply go to your calendar here and single click an open space, and it's going to open up a time entry. So I'm going to single click between 10 and 11 a.m. on Tuesday the 26th. And that's going to come up with a blank time entry form. So it's the same thing we saw after we were done working on our actual timed entry. The difference is that it doesn't know anything. So we would have to just start by saying, this is the client. What was the duration? Let's say it was 1 hour and 45 minutes. If you were just doing a favor for the client, you can just simply type in favor and then go to your billing and go to your descriptions and type that stuff out. But if you're actually working on a task that was for the client, you can only choose from the tasks that are actually assigned on this client's file from the business client section. And then the task item allows you to say, if it's monthly, which of those months was it actually that you were working on. It's not imperative that you do that, but it does flesh out the detail on things. And then all of the rest of the same settings are the same on the entry, so you just go ahead and save that, and that gets placed on your calendar. If you're the kind of person who likes to wait to the end of the day, though, and fire off a bunch of entries real quick, then using that quick entry icon that I referred to earlier, which is on the left in the blue area, looks like a letter A on a keyboard with a stopwatch. So this is the vertical form I was talking about. Now, it's all the same things as the calendar entry method, just laid out in one form. And what happens with this is when you tell it when you began your day, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete my entry from earlier just so it starts where I'm going to be putting things at the initial point of my day here. Okay, so I started my day at 9 a.m. The first thing I did was an hour. It was for this client, and it was a certain kind of task. So as you can see, it's all the same settings here. Task item is available. It fills out my details and descriptions, and I can use my charges. These checkboxes on the right, the only ones that matter here is the time entry name one and the last two. They'll just clear out whatever descriptions are in those fields when we go to the next entry. So you'll see when we hit save and next, the window's going to stay open and immediately just go to the next available time slot in my day. So I can immediately put in my next entry and my next one and my next one. This way I'm not having to open and close a time entry window every time I want to put in a new entry. So it's just a much faster method in terms of less frustrating. You don't have to open and close a window every time you do this. So when we close this window and it confirms, are you sure you're good to save everything here, the entries get placed on the calendar right after that. Now, concerning that horizontal form I spoke of earlier, let's just have a look at that there. So what the difference is with this guy, you're only allowed to say the client name, the type of task, the task item, work code, duration, and descriptions. So you can have the program be told what kind of work or what kind of charges are being performed based on the task type, but you can also have that overridden and use work codes to give it more details as well too. But you can see you can't really select anything concerning billing rates or a lot of other settings. You can't really make any major adjustments here. So it's just meant to sort of choose the client name, hit tab, put in the next detail, tab, next detail, tab, next detail, and then when you finally get to the end and you hit tab again, it just starts a new line. So you don't have to use your mouse as much. It's more just like kind of a tab select, tab select, tab select. And then when you're done, you click OK, and the entries will once again get put on at that portion of your day. And it'll start from the beginning portion of your day to the end of it. So it'll basically just start at 9 a.m. and then just put your entries in subsequently from there. But again, the most commonly used method is the vertical form. Now, you can see that when the entries are put into your system here, the calendar method isn't the world's best method of viewing the information, but if we go to the month view here, which is accessible from the top right-hand corner, you do get a very quick idea of the amount of entries per day and then also the total time rounded up to the nearest 5 minutes on this particular view. If you want to see details on things, though, what you're going to want to do is go to the time list here on the left. And then in here, if you're familiar with doing searching in other parts of the program, you'll find that there is a magnifying glass in the top left. So what we can do is we can specify the search parameters of the time entries in which we want to see. Now let's say I want to see just everything one user has entered for a certain period of time. So I'm going to choose an employee name by activating the employee and then saying which name I want. And I want everything. So I'm not going to choose any other statuses here. I'm just going to go to the date range and I'm going to select the last couple of months here for this user. So in the very top left, it says there's a total of 28 time entries. And as we get to the bottom here, we can see that there are some calculations being done on the total time, the actual time recorded. And then if you want to actually show more details, by default, there should actually be more showing. So you can actually show the real total amounts, any adjustments, final total amounts in here as well too. So if we just scroll down again and take a look at that. So there's the actual total charged amount after all adjustments have been said and done at this point. So we have $86.90. But that's not necessarily for all the same client. These are just the one user that has entered time in that time period. Now, if you want to get a list of all the time for a specific client, just go to that magnifying glass in the top left and deselect whatever you don't want to see. Then select Bill to Client. If you want to see just unbilled statuses, then use the first 3 WIP statuses here. And if you just want to see everything unbilled, then just remove your date range and go ahead and tell it to give you that report. So in this case, we've got 2 entries, and they total $400 of unbilled WIP to this client, meaning they have not yet been added to an invoice. If you need further calculations that you can't necessarily acquire in here, you can run a variety of different reports and then export them to Excel. So if you wanted to see multiple clients or multiple tasks of task types on here or multiple work codes, instead of just being able to search by one, if you want to search by multiple items, what you can do is click on the Advanced Multiple Select Search form. It's the button in the middle at the bottom of this little square window here. And then this allows you to search by multiple things at the same time. But again, you're still only going to get one total at the bottom. So when you've got your result, then what you can do is click the column header to sort it by the client name, let's say. And then you can click Export to Excel at the top. So now everything is sorted, and you'll have an easier time just running your calculations for whatever you want to see in Excel. Also, you'll find in the reports at the top of the program, the Advanced Time and Billing Reports option, there is quite a few other reports that now exist in the program. These will be part of the Time and Billing edition and Workflow edition of the program as well. So let's say you wanted to see how much one of your users is making you over the last certain period of time based on the amount of hours they're doing versus what's actually being charged versus the billing rate that's being used. So there's a productivity report that actually allows you to see that. So when we click productivity and then we go next, we have a variety of different customizations that we can also use to generate the exact details we want to see. Now let's just say we want to see no grouping or anything. We just want to look by this one employee here. So we're going to choose a particular individual. And then finally, let's say just give me all date ranges here. You can choose a certain date. But what this is going to do is it's going to show me, okay, for this person, the amount of hours they've put in is 482 hours and 19 minutes. Billable time is 480. Now that's a fairly unrealistic example because this is more of a test data that I've been working with for a long time. But in reality, you're going to have a lot of time that you've maybe written off or you're not charging for or you've adjusted time. So instead of it being more or less 100% billable, you're probably going to be looking more frequently on the average of about 70, 69%, 68%, something like that. And then the effective billing rate is basically that this person is effectively billing out at this much per hour. So then if you subtract that as to what you give that person in terms of their income, then you would know that this is how much that this particular user is now generating as income for you. So again, that's under the reports menu at the top in the advanced time and billing reports option. So there's a lot of different reports in there that you can get out of that. So if you can't get it in the time list, you should be able to get it in there. Also, you'll find that there is a reports wizard under that same menu. And there are also another set of different reports in here, including employee timesheet reports, which are going to show a breakdown of individual days per week, per day, and then also a total at the end of that for the time period you're selecting. So again, a lot of different types of reports. And again, any report you generate can be exported into Excel. Now, in terms of creating invoice, what we want to do is we want to click on Create Invoice here on the left-hand side. What you're going to do is you're going to type the client's name in the top, and that's going to highlight it for you here in the list and show you the total outstanding WIP amount at the very top. Once you've got that number in mind, then you can either choose one of these three methods to create an invoice and tell it to either select all WIP or specific time entries. And these three methods are as follows from left to right. So the left one will send all the original details in total to the invoice. Nothing will be modified or hidden or changed. The middle one will send all of the original details in terms of like descriptions and whatever you want to show the client to the invoice, but the total is going to be whatever you type in the flat rate amount. So let's say you're that client who doesn't charge any billing rate amounts. You could just use this middle option and then say, okay, here's the total that we're charging. Or you could say, let's say that was $1,575 there, so we want to round that up to $1,600. Maybe that's also what you do. The icon or the option on the right is for the scenario where whether you're charging for one item or 1,000 items, you do not want the client to see any of the original details whatsoever. So what this is going to do is it's going to apply all of that WIP to the invoice, but hide everything, including the total. So you want to make note of what the total is before you hit create. And it's going to come up with a window that allows you to say, okay, tell me what you want to show the client. In this button here labeled Manage Your Custom Invoice Items, the gray one in the top right, this is where you can actually pre-save your own custom descriptions in here. And what's great about this is that means that you don't have to keep typing them out every time. And if also one of them has a constant fee of the same thing, like a license fee for a program you use that you have to charge for when you use it, this could also be a thing you could do. Now, don't worry about tax codes there. They're irrelevant. What you want to do is just make sure you got your description. So name, description, and then the type of charge if you do want to have that on there. The date will change as you're entering things, so don't worry about that as well. When your items are in, now you can click the green button to add the custom lines you want. So every time you click the green button, it adds a custom line. And then you can choose from the items that you've previously saved. And finally then type the charge you want to give them. If I want to say anything more to the client as well, I can actually type more words into the description area. This won't modify the original template that I've created. It'll just show up on this one invoice. So when we show this to the client's now only seeing what I want them to see with total, tax, and final amount. However, this is what an invoice looks like after I've made some modifications. So let's show you what an unedited invoice looks like. We're just going to create the original one here on the left. Now I'm going to go to my adjustments and I'm going to just reset everything back to the default. Okay, so before you make any real adjustments, this is more what the invoice is going to look like. And very likely you don't want to show the client all of that detail. Maybe you don't want to print in any colors. Maybe you want to remove the lines between the columns. So if you want to make any of those changes, you're going to go to the top here and click on the adjustments gear icon here. So for starters, if you don't like the grid lines between the columns, those are the 4 here under formatting that say grid lines. That will remove those lines. If you don't like that extra little blue total bar below the columns as well, that's the top left checkbox in here. So if we get rid of that, we're going to see all that stuff disappear. And if we scroll down there, you'll see that that other total bar is gone. If you want to get rid of the colors, you can just go to the Colors tab and just change everything to black on white. Be careful with your fonts, of course, because we have had people call and ask why they couldn't see anything, and that's because they changed all the colors to white. So I'm sure you guys can agree with me, it's very hard to distinguish white from itself. So we go in there, and that cleans that up a bit. Now, maybe we don't want to show the client anything other than descriptions. So we go back in one more time. We go to the columns. You can change the order in which the columns appear. You can change the names of them. That won't change the function of the column, just simply the name. And you can also remove whatever you don't want. But you'll notice there, below this, it says total page width used. And as we remove things, the number drops. You always have to make sure that you use 100% of the page. So since I've got one column, I'm just going to give 100% to that. And now we're back at what we saw earlier with just descriptions, subtotal, tax. If you want to make any adjustments to the subtotal, under the cash register icon in adjustments, you can go into there and you can make any changes that you want for that particular item. So when you make any adjustments to your subtotal, you can give them either a markup or a markdown in the window that comes up. And you can also either choose to show that to the client or not. So you can make an outright change to the subtotal, or you can show it as an actual markup or markdown, depending on what you want to see. Also, when you're in an invoice as well, too, you can add custom lines at that time. And you can also apply extra charges to those extra lines as well. So I'm just going to get rid of the invoice that's on my screen here and create a new one. Okay, so we've got one with a few less charges on it. Now, if I want to put an extra line on here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Add Custom Items. And then I'm going to click the clipboard, and that's going to give me that window that we saw earlier when we just chose to simply hide everything and say, this is what we want to show the client. So I can add an extra line, once again, choose from my saved items, and then put an extra charge in there if I want. So that's going to not necessarily show the charge because I didn't display the individual charge columns, but it is going to add that to the total at this point. Whenever you're done with an invoice, what you want to do is post it. If you forget to do that and you exit out of here, it's going to say, would you like to do that, yes or no? When you do that, it'll clear out that WIP. So the WIP will still be searchable in the time list, but it'll be shown as billed and it'll be locked so that you can't make any changes to it because now it's been applied to an invoice. And then the invoices you create will end up in what's called View AR here on the left-hand side. And when we go to the magnifying glass, we can run a report of whatever it is we want to see for the created invoices. So let's say, give me everything for this client, all invoices, all dates. So we can see the different days of creation, the different invoice numbers, the different due dates, also any sort of adjustments and things that we've done and payments that have been made. Now, just to describe here, the adjusted amount and the difference column amounts, there's a bit of a sort of an understanding about these. So the adjusted amount column shows whether or not you've actually made an adjustment to the subtotal. The difference amount describes whether or not there was actually a difference from the final total amount from the original amount versus what was actually charged. So here, for example, I create an invoice and I adjust the subtotal by -$50, and that's it. I don't do anything else. So I'm going to show an adjusted amount of -50 and a difference of -50. Now, I make another invoice, and I add an additional $50 as a custom line to that, but then I adjust the subtotal by a -$50. So I'm still going to show an adjusted amount of -50, but I'm going to show a difference of 0, because from the original amount that was being charged, there is no difference. And if you want to add payments to these guys, what you do is you click the Add Payment button on the left. You're going to say which client has given you the payment. how much they've given you. And then also you can choose in the top right-hand corner here when the actual items were received and deposited. On the next tab, we can then say if we're applying the entire amount to one existing invoice, or we can click the green button multiple times and split it up against multiple different invoices. So I could say give 100 to the older one and then the remaining 50 to the newer one. That's going to use up that deposit. That's going to refresh the list, and then we're going to see the new total is, in this case, $32,900 towards the $34,237 outstanding. And then once again, you can also use this to pop the report into Excel if you need to do anything further. For those who are not given permission to see billing rates, they cannot access the time list and they cannot access the View AR section, just to point that out. All right, so that wraps up the time and billing function. We're now going to look at appointments and projects. These obviously won't take nearly as much time. Now, one of the things that we like to sort of just start by pointing out is that there is a task calendar in the task section, which is separate from the appointments calendar. So this is the task calendar, and then this one here is the appointments. And they look pretty much the same thing, but they are separate. So what I get a lot for a question is there any way to sort of see those guys at the same time? So yes, you can. While you're actually in the appointments section and you're looking at either the day or week view, you'll find in the bottom right there's an option that says Merge Appointment and Task Calendars. And if we click that, we're actually now able to see not just the appointments we're working with, but also the tasks we have on the schedule. So see if I remove that, the tasks disappear. If I put it back on, they're back on again. So aside from that, if you've used pretty much any appointment scheduling software ever, you should be able to work your way around this fairly straightforward and quickly. But let's just show you a couple things. So first off, you don't have to choose a client when you're putting when you're putting an entry in your actual appointments calendar, because maybe it's just something for yourself. But you can, of course, choose a client to say this is a client it's with. You can also make it private so that if somebody else is looking at your calendar from their login using the drop-down on the top right, they're going to see that you're busy, but not what you're doing. Now also, you can set the amount of time that you want to allot to this. You can remind yourself by a pop-up, and that can be either 5 minutes ahead, 10 minutes ahead, to a couple of days ahead, 3 weeks ahead. So you can have the option to choose how much notice you want to give yourself. And then once the notice comes up, you can actually snooze that too. You can have it repeat, let's say every day of the week up to a certain ending period, certain days throughout the week. Again, always they have to be told when does it end. Once a month to an ending date, once a year to an ending date. So you can have that do that. You can also have it create a notification on your notifications window when you log into the program, so that it reminds you to send out word to whoever you might want to send this out to by choosing or typing email, fax letter, or phone call. So you're going to choose one of the options. If you're choosing email, you want to type out the email if you're not actually choosing a client. Otherwise, if you choose a client, it should automatically fill that out. And then you can also apply the appointment to other users. So if everybody needs this meeting on their calendar, you can just say, give it to everybody, and then click OK to save that. Now, since our appointment calendars are separate from each other, what we can do is we can also turn on the overlap here on the left-hand side. This allows me to see multiple users at the same time, separating our names by color. And if you've told the program to show you tasks at the same time as this, you would actually be able to see all tasks and all appointments for all users simultaneously. So if I need to, let's say, schedule a staff meeting or something like that, then I would know everybody would be free on Friday at 12 because there's nothing scheduled there. There's no tasks, no appointments, and that way I can go ahead and do that. Now you'll also notice that if two people have an appointment on the same day at the same time for the same length of time, the appointments will just show sort of chunked beside each other. And the more people that have it, the more difficult it'll be to see, but you'll at least know who it is based on the color, which is represented in the bottom right as to whose name belongs to who. Whenever you're done with your overlap, you can go to sort of the bottom middle left-ish area and click on Cancel Overlap just to go back to your singular view. And then one final thing, if you happen to be using Microsoft Outlook, that is the only calendar program this does synchronize with. So you can go to the File menu and say Sync with MS Outlook. It's going to ask you to send your appointments, and then next it's going to ask you which way you're going. So you're going to say from Outlook to Client Track or from Client Track to Outlook. Then after that, it's going to ask you what date range do you want to sync up. Or sorry, actually, it's going to ask you first whose Client Track calendar you're doing that with. My apologies. And then it's going to ask you what date range you want to sync up. Now, as a suggestion, we just say to synchronize no more than maybe like a 2-week period, just in case there's a problem with communication in the programs, like maybe Microsoft doesn't update and things aren't talking the way they used to, and let's say it puts in, doubles the appointments. It's not too hard to clean up that 2-week period, as opposed to if you say do absolutely all date ranges. And that's just a safety precaution. Just to give you an example of what happened to me, not concerning Client Track, but years ago when I used to synchronize iTunes with Outlook, I told it to do all date ranges no matter what it was. And Outlook had done an update to their software, which had effectively made it communicate incorrectly with iTunes. And then when the sync ran, it deleted all my appointments from both softwares. And that was on part for the Outlook software, just making some changes that were not compatible. I was able, of course, to recover it because iPhones make backups. But as a safety precaution, like I said, no matter what software you're using, if you're synchronizing to other companies' software, keep it to a 2-week period. It's way easier to recover from that. We've never seen that deletion happen from Client Track to Outlook, but we did see just about 5.5 years ago it was putting in doubles of the appointments. Since then, there hasn't been anything like that, but it's not to say that there is a chance that it couldn't happen. There is certainly a very small chance that it could, but it's unlikely. So that's just my opinion of being safe with software usage. The last thing we're going to look at today is the project section. So first thing to point out about a project, because I often get asked this question, what's the difference between a task and a project? Well, the biggest difference between a task and a project is, for starters, the fact that projects don't automatically reoccur every following year. You have to schedule them every time you want them to happen. Secondly, a project is not just like a task where it's got one thing with a due date and that's it. A project has a set of steps that are due within a starting and an ending date period that each step needs to be completed on, and then you can track these together as a whole. So what you're going to do to create a project is you're going to go to the Manage button here on the left-hand side in the blue area, and that's going to give you your project management window. You're going to create yourself a template, and that template is going to come up with this window when you click Add New Template. And you're going to tell the program how many steps does it take you to normally get this completed. So every time you click Add New, it adds a new step. And then you can rename each step to whatever you want, give it some sort of description, and you can also assign users to each of these steps so that everybody knows who's responsible for what's going on here. On the next tab, we can then say these steps are due either relative to the start of the project or fixed target dates. Now, it's generally better to use relative to the start of the project, because if you use fixed dates, you'll have to make sure you go in and update those settings before you schedule it any time going forward in future, because otherwise the dates will be the previous dates you chose. Whereas if you use relative to the start of the project, it means they're always going forward with you. So you could say that every time we work on this, the first thing is due 4 days after the start of the project, with a 5-day warning to the project leader and a 6-day warning to the project leader if it's not getting done on time. And then your next step could be one number increase. So day 5 with a, again, 6-day warning, and then 7-day. So again, you can set all of your different types of settings that you want here so that everything is being done on time. You can even go to the billing info tab, and again, just like we saw when we were looking at setting up billing rates and things like that earlier, you can tell it that when time is being recorded to these steps to know exactly what it should be charging and what kind of descriptions the user should be giving, but this is very much optional. You don't have to do that. So when you go ahead and click OK to save that, that is going to save that as a template as part of your projects that are now on your template list in this window. So then if you want to apply to a client or multiple clients, you would just go in here and say, this is the client I want to give it to. You can apply it to however many different ones you want. When you actually go and apply to the client, it's going to then ask you, okay, well, who's the project leader? So you're going to choose from your users. When does it start? When is it ending? So let's say it's ending next month, or sorry, in August 15th, so that's actually more than a month away. You can choose to give the project a budget which will disperse the budgeted time amongst the steps, but you don't have to do that. And you also give it a cost budget, which again is optional, and that will basically just say splitting the charge amongst the steps so that whenever you're recording time on it and you're about to charge more than was allotted for that step, you'll get a warning saying you're about to charge more. Would you like to keep charging or stop at this point? So that's going to add that to the program. It's going to tell you when it's been done, and that's going to refresh the list. So we now see a new project appearing in here. And as we look at this, we've got the project leader showing. We have sort of the overall status. So, you know, are we in progress? Are we on hold? What's going on in general for things? We also have the ability to say that we received everything, and then that gets recorded as the date you chose that you said you received everything. And you'll also get a counter that says how long you've been working on things since you said you received all of the information, as well as your target end date. And then when everything is done, you can close the project, which will also happen when you change it to completed under the status here. Another thing you can do is you can go to the drop down in the top right, and you can sort it by a specific project type so that it'll break down the steps of what's being done so you can see them being completed together here. Now this section of the program is more just for administrators or full users who are going to be actively overseeing things. But the steps of the projects will actually appear as part of people's task calendars and task lists. So when they run reports to see what they're responsible for, they're going to know and be aware of these items. And when they close a step on that side of the program, it will show as closed over here. And also, if they've chosen to leave any extra notes on it, you'll also see that if you click beside the step in the same column area, you'll get more details. And if they left any notes on it, you'd see them right here. Now, one last thing, well, actually two last things. You can go back into Business Clients and have a look at the Projects tab here to see what's been assigned to this client. It's not overly relevant to really have to do that from here because there's just so much more detail in the project section, but just to make you aware it does exist. And lastly, at the very top, just below the drop-down where we can look at a certain project type, there's a button here that says Internal Staff Notification. If we activate this, and we go in here and we say notify staff of any project step, information, and status changes. So effectively what happens here is if I assign a step to somebody other than who it was assigned to, then that person's going to get a pop-up to let them know. Or if I close my step, then the next person in line is going to get a pop-up to let them know that they can begin working on their step now. You can set it up so that the leader is notified when something is completed. So there's a lot of internal pop-ups that you can activate in here to keep people aware of things so you don't have to keep walking over to each other's desks and making sure that everybody's aware that you've done something when the program can just sort of pop up and do that for you. So with all that said, that's obviously a lot of information, but if you want to review this anytime that you want to in future, what you're going to do is head over to clienttrack.ca and go to the support page of our website. And there's actually two resources you can utilize in here. The first thing is available on the support page under Contact Us. There's an option that says View In-Depth Demos. Click that. You're going to see videos parts 1 and 2, which are the same thing that we go through in these long sessions here on the part 1 and 2 that you can sign up for every week on Wednesday. So you can review that information anytime you want. If you're looking for something specific, though, then also on the support page, there's an item here that says Support Center, and if you click View on that, you're going to get a new tab that opens up. And this is going to show you a bunch of different sections that are broken for the software. So you can actually go into a specific location, and then you're going to see guides in here as well that you can click on to learn something very specific about the program. And you'll notice that at the bottom of almost all of these, there is a video that will reiterate what this guide is trying to explain to you. Not every one of them has it, but the majority of them will have a video that re-describes things in there. So at this point, if you have any further questions about the program as you're going through things, don't be afraid to just send them off to support@clienttrack.ca. But we want to thank you very much for joining the session. We hope that you found the information was helpful and very relevant to what you're trying to learn in the software. And again, if you want to go through anything further, if you want to have a session with us to go through things personally, then just send, again, an email to support@clienttrack.ca and just let us know of a day and a time that will work for you. And then we'll set that up and we'll go through things personally. Or if you have a list of questions, you can also gather those and then book aside an hour so we can go through those things personally as a one-on-one as well. Well, thanks very much for joining us. We hope you have yourselves a wonderful day, and we'll talk to you very, very shortly, I'm sure. But until then, enjoy your day.